So, for my costume class final, usually they have people make a pair of pants for any fictional character, but because we're living in Corona times, our assignment was to upcycle an article of clothing we already own and design it for a character. Because I'm a sneaky bastard child, I decided to work backwards and do an upcycle I'd already been planning on doing and then assign a fictional character to it after. I've never done anything like this, but I've seen a lot of beginning videos on YouTube, and oftentimes they turn out really well, so I figured, hey, I should try it. So I decided I was going to upcycle this show shirt I got from being in Wind in the Willows my junior year of high school. For some reason, I used to order my sew shirts a size too big, because I didn't understand the difference between unisex sizes and junior sizes. So as of now, I usually just wear the shirt tucked in like this. My plan is to crop and hem the bottom, roll up the sleeves and sew them in place, and embroider some flowers growing up from the bottom hem. I did an outline of the shirt as part of the assignment, then I grabbed some pins and a ruler, tried on the shirt, and pinned where I wanted to cut. I measured how much I was going to be taking off and then wrote that down. Then I rolled up and pinned my sleeve, which was dumb and stupid because I ended up redoing this later. Then I drew a line at about 10 inches from the bottom for some reason, I'm sure. Then I pinned up on that line and tried on, I don't know, to check the vibes or something. So I wrote all this detail down in my outline, and when I was measuring how much spare room I'd have for embroidering, I realized that, oops, I had stabbed myself and was bleeding on my shirt. I cleaned it off, hung it off to dry, and while that was happening, worked more on my outline, writing down which specific stitches I'd be using and drawing out my flowers. Here is my sample embroidery, and here are some of the stitches I'm going to use. Then I went through my big bag of floss and picked out some colors. Because I'm a beginner and inherently cautious person, I took some of my extra muslin and floss and tried out some of the flowers I was going to make, so I didn't do them for the first time on the shirt. Then it was the next day and my shirt had dried stain-free. I manned up and finally cut the bottom off my shirt. It was alright. I turned the shirt inside out, pinned up the hem, and then started doing a cross stitch to hem it closed. But I was actually being a big dummy and hemming the bottom of the fold instead of the top of it, so when I put it on, it just folded over. Don't ask me where my brain cells were, I also want to know. So I used my seam ripper and ripped out the seams, and then for some reason, left unknown, I just started recutting the bottom. I don't remember why I did this. I'm sure it made sense at the time, and then as soon as I was finished, I was like, oh god, what have I done? Not my finest moment. So I asked my dad for some assistance, and he helped, thanks dad. The next day I went back, turned on some YouTube videos, and correctly hemmed the shirt. The fabric was stiffer than I intended, and it was hurting me to push it through. I didn't have a thimble, so I used this hanger. This took quite a while. But then, it was finished! It's not even, but hey, I'm very proud of it. I repinned my sleeves and used a slip stitch to close it. Sorry for leaving my pin cushion in the foreground, oops. And then, it was time to start embroidering. Fair warning, all the footage of me embroidering is terrible. I wish I owned a tripod, or maybe some brain cells. Anyway, I'm working with what I got. My first flower is sort of inspired by a tulip. I used a back stitch as the stem and for outlining the flower. I wanted both sides of the flower to be the same, so I took a piece of paper and cut out 3 different sizes and see which one worked the best. I went with the middle one. I did the same for the leaves at the bottom and went with the first one. I just filled in the petals and then used a French knot as the pollen things. I was intimidated by the leaves, so I decided to save them for later. The next flower I did was inspired by a dandelion when it's in wish form. You know what I'm talking about. I used a long French knot, which we had learned to make in this half circle, and I just made it in a full circle. I used a feather stitch in the seam and then freehanded it down to the hemline. I thought the white was gonna stick out a tiny bit better against the yellow, but it really does not, which is a shame, because I like this one. Next I did a little cluster of daisies. I sketched out 3 stems and used an outline stitch on them in different greens for variety. There's this super simple stitch called a lazy daisy, and that's what I used for the actual flower. Lastly, I got experimental and made some lavender. I used this brown floss backstitch for the stem and then used my purple starting up part way on the stem and used a long French stitch to make the petals. Petals? Is that right? Anyway, this took forever, but it is my favorite. So then I had done all I had to do, but I wasn't super satisfied, so I added another long French knot, this time in a different color, but psych, it's still basically invisible from a distance. And then I finished up the leaves off camera because they were scary. I used 2 different colors going in opposite directions to grade shade, depth, art. Then, ta-da! It's done! It's not great, but it is my first upcycle project, so I'm insanely proud of it. Here are a couple things I learned with this project. 1. T-shirts are way tougher to sew through than I thought they were going to be. My fingers really hurt. 2. Check to make sure you aren't bleeding on your garment. 3. Think before you act, for like more than a second. 4. I really like embroidery. I think I'm gonna do this again sometime. And lastly, 5. I don't have to create something perfect to create something I'm proud of.